Why do we have exactly 7 days in a week when literally every other measurement system is based on 10s or 12s? I mean, 5 days in a week makes more sense than compared to 7? Right. Think about it. We count money in 10s, measure time in 12s and 60s. Even our most ancient number systems follow predictable patterns. But 7 is just sitting there being weird, and probably 8, 9. The answer takes us back thousands of years to when humans first started obsessing over the night sky, and trust me, the reason is way more bizarre than you'd expect. Picture ancient Babylon around 3,000 years ago. These people were absolutely obsessed with astronomy, and for good reason. Their survival depended on predicting floods, planning harvests, and navigating trade routes. So every night, Babylonian priests would climb their ziggurats and stare at the heavens, carefully tracking every speck of light. Now here's where it gets interesting. While most stars stayed perfectly still relative to each other, forming those familiar constellations that never change, there were exactly 7 objects that kept wandering around like they had somewhere important to be. The sun and moon were obvious, moving across the sky in predictable patterns. But there were also 5 mysterious points of light that drifted slowly between the stars, sometimes even appearing to move backward. The Babylonians called these moving objects planets, literally meaning wanderers in Greek, and they were utterly fascinated by them. Remember, these ancient astronomers had no idea what planets actually were. For all they knew, these could be gods, spirits, or magical forces controlling human destiny. What they did know was that these 7 wanderers were clearly different from everything else in the sky. So naturally, they decided these cosmic travelers deserved their own day of worship. Each wandering object got assigned to rule over 1 day of a 7-day cycle. This wasn't just random superstition either. The Babylonians were serious about this. They believed each planet god had specific powers and influences, so the day dedicated to that planet would carry those same mystical properties. But here's where the story gets really interesting. This 7-day system spread across the ancient world like a viral TikTok dance. The Jews adopted it during their Babylonian exile around the 6th century BC, but they stripped out all the planet worship and turned it into the biblical week with a day of rest. The Romans initially thought this was weird. They preferred an 8-day cycle called the Nundinae. But eventually, even they gave in to the 7-day pressure. When the Roman Empire converted to Christianity in the 4th century AD, they officially adopted the 7-day week throughout their territories. But here's the kicker, they kept all the pagan planet names. So we ended up with this bizarre hybrid where Christian Europe was following a biblical 7-day rhythm while literally naming each day after ancient gods. The sun got Sunday because, well, it's hard to argue with the biggest, brightest thing in the sky. The moon got Monday. You know, moon and day is pretty straightforward. But then things get culturally messy because different languages borrowed from different mythologies. Mars got Tuesday, but most Germanic languages borrowed from Norse mythology instead of Roman. So in English, it became Tyr's Day, after their one-handed war god who was brave enough to stick his hand in a wolf's mouth. Mercury became Wednesday, as in Woden's Day, after the Norse messenger god who could travel between worlds. Jupiter became Thursday, which is Thor's Day, because thunder gods demand respect. And honestly, who's going to argue with a guy who carries a magic hammer and regularly holds a presence in billion-dollar movies? Next, Venus became Friday, as in Freya's Day, after the Norse goddess of love and fertility, which explains why Friday feels like the beginning of weekend romance. And Saturn kept Saturday because apparently Romans were more stubborn about that one, and Saturn's Day stuck even in Germanic languages. Bunch of people organizing their worship day become backbone of our entire modern lives around ancient people's interpretation of wandering dots in the sky. Your weekly schedule, your work routine, your weekend plans, all of it traces back to Babylonian priests counting moving lights and deciding they must be gods. But then came the 1500s, and along came Nicholas Copernicus to absolutely ruin everything. This guy had the audacity to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. Worse yet, he proved that the sun isn't actually a planet. It's a star that we orbit. And the moon isn't a planet either. It's just a big rock orbiting us. So suddenly our 7-day week was based on a completely wrong understanding of astronomy. We had been dedicating days to planets that weren't even planets. It was like finding out your favorite superhero was actually just a guy in a really good costume. You'd think this would be the perfect time to reform the calendar, right? Create a nice logical 10-day week that matches our decimal system, or maybe go with 12 days to match our hourly system. Well, good news. Some people actually tried this. During the French Revolution in the 1790s, they attempted to create a 10-day week as part of their metric calendar system. But here's the thing about human behavior. We absolutely hate changing things that are already working, even when they're based on completely outdated information. By Copernicus's time, people had been following this 7-day rhythm for over 2,000 years. It was baked into religious practices, work schedules, market days, social customs, and basically every aspect of daily life. Imagine trying to convince everyone in your country to suddenly switch to a 10-day week. Sorry, your weekend is canceled, and also Christmas is now on 5th day. The resistance would be immediate and intense. The French actually discovered this the hard way. Their revolutionary calendar was so unpopular that Napoleon scrapped it after just 12 years. So we're still stuck with our astronomically obsolete week system. Every Monday morning when you're dragging yourself to work, remember that you're participating in a tradition that started because some ancient Babylonian priest looked at the moon and thought, "That bright circle is definitely a wandering god who deserves his own day."